never found out why he chose me to share his secret. Perhaps because we had similar dreams. But this was twice as fast. Twice as powerful as anything I'd ever thought possible. Though what that meant, I could never have foreseen. Incredible graphics and colors, so many colors. Our world would never be the same again.
The story of the Amiga CD32 starts in the late 1970s at Atari. Nolan Bushnell had recently sold Atari to Warner Communication because of financial issues Atari was having at the time. Once Warner took over, the work culture at Atari had changed. Atari programmers were not getting the credit for the games they were making, and instead of developing the next game console, Atari used the technology that was supposed to be used in the latest console to develop their first computer. And this frustrated many folks that worked at Atari at the time. This is when Nolan Bushnell left Atari. Jay Miner, who had helped develop the technology that was supposed to go on the next game console, wanted to create another console using the Motorola 68000 CPU. Atari nixed the idea, and this is when Miner left Atari as well. Also around this time, several programmers left Atari. A few went off to form a new game company named Activision. These programmers were David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead. Larry Kaplan worked to get investors on the new computer project. He hired Miner, who had been out of the industry for a couple years, and started a new company called High Toro. High Toro was established in 1982 with David Morse as CEO and with Kaplan and Miner working on development. Initially, they started the company to create a new game system. This game system would be based on the Motorola 68000 CPU and was being built on breadboards. It was codenamed the Lorraine, named after David Morse's wife, Lorraine. Shortly after that, Kaplan was contacted by Nolan Bushnell. Bushnell convinced him to leave High Toro and come with him to develop a new system, as it would be better financially for him. Kaplan agreed and left High Toro, which proved to be a bad decision. In Kaplan's own words, Bushnell flaked out on their deal and it never happened. Meanwhile, over at High Toro, Miner was promoted to lead engineer and started working with R.J. Mickle and Dale Luck to finish the Lorraine. It was also at this time that the company's name was changed from High Toro to Amiga. By late 1983, the prototype was finished. Although the IC dies were still not developed, the system ran off several breadboards with discrete logic components making up what would soon be Amiga's custom chips. But all this came at a price, and Amiga was losing money fast. In January of 1984, two important things happened. Jack Tramiel resigned at Commodore, and the Lorraine would be demoed at the CES show. Amiga still hadn't developed much software for it. In fact, the system didn't even have an operating system or BIOS yet. But what it did have was one amazing program. We all know it as Boing, the bouncing ball, which later became the logo for Amiga. Patrons attending the show were amazed by the graphics of the 3D animated ball. Some even accused the Amiga team of hooking a different computer up to it to accomplish what they were seeing. This is when Atari saw the Lorraine and wanted to develop their next-gen game console from the technology. Amiga and Atari had even started development of a game console named the 1850 XLD. Then the video game crash of North America started in full swing. Atari lost over $1 million in 1 week and Warner Communications won it out. So talks and development with Amiga came to a standstill, all the while Amiga was on the brink of bankruptcy. In June of '84, Jack Tramiel bought Atari. During his brief time between this and Commodore, he started Tramiel Technology. He recruited most of the high-ranking engineers from Commodore to come along with him. They had started development on their own 68,000 base computer, but the Lorraine was further along. Jack knew Amiga was on the brink of bankruptcy and knew they were desperate and it was time to make his move. Atari gave Amiga a 1-month loan of $500,000 to keep Amiga afloat. If they didn't pay it back, Atari would acquire all the rights to the Lorraine technology, basically putting Amiga out of business. For Amiga, this gave them 1 more month to find an investor before Atari took it all. Now over at Commodore, Irving Gould now ruled everything. He put Marshall F. Smith as CEO of Commodore. Commodore at this time was hurting for engineers because most had left the company to join Jack at Atari, so they needed a new computer. Talks between Commodore and Amiga started. First, Commodore offered Amiga just a licensing agreement worth $4 million, but soon changed it to an outright buying of Amiga for $24 million. Amiga agreed to this, and Amiga became a subsidiary of Commodore. By late 1984, the breadboards from the Lorraine became the Amiga's custom chips such as the Agnes, Denise, and Paula, which is known as the OCS or Original Chipset. In 1985, the Amiga, or later known as the Amiga 1000, was launched. 2 years later, the most successful Amigas were launched, the Amiga 500 and the Amiga 2000. Both using the OCS. Now from here on, I'm really going to hit the fast forward button. Sorry Amiga fans, I'm not going to go through every Amiga computer, but let me explain to the folks out there that from 1987 to 1992, 2 more chipsets were introduced to the Amiga. The enhanced chipset, which improved screen resolution and other video improvements. Then later, starting with the Amiga 4000, the advanced graphics architecture, or AGA, was introduced, a true 32-bit graphical chipset. Now, continuing with the fast forwarding, by 1993, as a whole, Commodore was just hurting financially. Irving Gould was running the company into the ground, and sales of all the Amiga models were low, and sales of the outdated Commodore 64 was almost nothing. The company at this point had been through several CEOs since Jack's departure. Things were looking bleak. But there might be a silver lining, making the Amiga do what the Amiga was designed to do, be a game console. Commodore had tried this in the past a couple of times with the Commodore 64 game system, which was just an absolute failure, and then with the Amiga CD32 TV, which wasn't very successful either. But things were different this time. This was a true 32-bit CD game system in 1992, right during the height of the 5th gen CD-ROM craze. Commodore was literally banking on this to keep the company going. They started to design the prototype, codenamed Spellbound. Really, it was just a consoleized Amiga 1200 with a CD-ROM running the AGA chipset, put into, dare I say, a pretty nice looking case, with design cues of the Sega Genesis. Then right around this time, one of the worst things that could have happened to Commodore did. They got sued for patent infringement. Apparently, Commodore infringed on XOR's technology that used different parts of the display such as the mouse pointer, menus, and dragging, and it also managed and controlled the memory for this. They went to US court and Commodore was ordered to pay $10 million. This couldn't have come at a worse time for Commodore. The CD32 was released on September 17, 1993 in the UK, and the rest of Europe shortly after. It was very successful due to the Amiga's popularity in Europe and its compatibility with other Amiga hardware and software. Things were actually looking pretty good for the system. Then later in September, Commodore demoed the CD32 at the World Amiga Show in Pasadena, California. They said that the unit would be shipped to some US cities by Christmas and have a full launch by January of 1994. However, time was not on Commodore's side. The deadline to pay off the $10 million debt was up, and now the US government put an injunction on Commodore that they could not do business in the United States until the debt was paid. Commodore had already produced thousands of consoles for the US and Canadian market, but the shipment was held up in the Philippines until the lawsuit and the debt to the Philippine console manufacturing plant and shippers was paid. In the European market, where the console was doing very well, Commodore could not keep up with the demand because there was a supply shortage of parts, and I'm assuming that's from all the parts that were used in the consoles for the US that were held up in the Philippines. This was the final nail in the coffin for Commodore. By April of 1994, they declared bankruptcy and all Commodore products were discontinued, even the CD32. But this isn't the end of the CD32 story. After Commodore dissolved, several companies bought the Amiga CD32s that were held up. Some were used in museums for information display units. One of the more popular uses was by an Italian company named CD Express. They created an arcade cabinet built around the Amiga CD32 called the Cubo CD32. Just a few games were made, most of which were puzzle games. Also, some Amiga CD32 motherboards were known to run slot and video poker machines from the early 2000s. Well, that brings us to the end of the CD32 story. A sad ending to a once great company. A good example of what poor management can do. Although the CD32 isn't well known in the US, it was very successful in Europe, selling over 125,000 units in its short 7-month lifespan, and being the last product Commodore made. Oh, hey, you guys are still here. Well, if you guys like the content, don't forget to hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell. That way you get notifications every time I drop new content like this. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to this game. Why don't you guys go ahead and get back to the video here.
Dad, you'll never believe what I just got. The new Amiga CD32 games console. It's got the best games and it's twice as fast as any other console. Not only that, but it also plays normal CDs.
That's interesting.
Yeah, soon it'll have full motion video so you can watch movies and stuff.
Is that right? Maybe we should get one for the grandkids, eh, son?
Great idea, Dad.
The new Amiga CD32 available now at Dick Smith Electronics.
Now for a quick look at some of the games on the CD32.
Nash is dead. You're on your own. Smart card message follows.